Okay, it's our pleasure to have you, Professor Salim Faraji, in our short interview program, sponsored by the Department of Archaeology, International University of Africa, in Khartoum, Sudan. Professor Salim from California State University, Domingos Health, is the former head department of Africana Studies. Professor Salim specializes in early Christian history, Africana and Africanist historiography, Coptic studies, and Karma, Nabata, Meroitic, and medieval periods of Nubian history. Professor Salim, our subject for this short interview in our program is how would Professor Salim explain cultural complexity and multiple religious identities in medieval Nubia? Professor Salim, you're welcome in our interview program. And
Thank you very much, Dr. Farouk, and I'm pleased to be here with you today. And I'm always excited to talk about Kushite, Nubian, Meroitic civilization. So, yes, the Meroitic period, and then certainly what other scholars have called the post-Meroitic period into the medieval period, is a fascinating time during Middle Nile Valley history. And it is during that time that we see the interaction of a complexity of cultures and religious practices. And so my scholarship and my research has focused on ancient Nubia between the 4th and 6th century AD, the transitional period when ancient Kushite Meroitic civilization is slowly transitioning into the medieval period, and also has encountered Christianity via Byzantium, of course, and also the Coptic Church in Egypt. And so what I've looked at is how does this ancient culture, these Kushite Nubian traditions, how do they negotiate and reconfigure themselves in the encounter with Christianity, the encounter with the late Roman Empire and Byzantium, and even the encounter with Coptic Egypt, which certainly that was the case in Egypt between the 4th and 6th century AD. And so it's a fascinating period. So I actually wrote a book that was based on my dissertation, came out in 2012, The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, The Triumph of the Last Pharaoh, The Roots of Nubian Christianity Uncovered, The Triumph of the Last Pharaoh. And the subtitle of my book is Religious Encounters in Late Antique Africa, Religious Encounters in Late Antique Africa. And I used the Silko inscription as a window to kind of tease out and assess what was going on between the 4th and 6th century. And so this Nubian pharaoh, Silko, he left an inscription in Greek at the temple of Kalopsha, which would have been Lower Nubia. Today, it's technically in Egyptian Nubia in the vicinity of Aswan. So he left this inscription in Greek. So here's a Nubian pharaoh who himself was over a polity that contained Nubian elements, Meroitic elements, as well as Coptic Egypt was within his sphere of interaction, and also diplomacy with the late Roman Empire and Byzantium. And so I argue that this Nubian pharaoh Silko was multilingual. He did speak the Nubian languages, Meroitic, probably had some knowledge of Coptic, and certainly was also conversant in Greek as well. So he leaves a victory inscription. And in this inscription, he says God has given him the victory over the rival Blimian polities or ethnic kingdoms that also existed in that region at the time as well. So there was a conflict between the Nubides, if you will, and the Blimies. And so his polity, his kingdom was a composite It was a Nubadian Meroitic, if you will, kingdom comprised of these two ethnic groups and so forth. And then not only that, when we look at the remains of the two major cemeteries for the Nubadian kingdom at Balana and Kustul, we see ancient tumuli where they were buried. The Christian funerary practices hadn't really taken root as of yet during this time because it's the transitional period. And so we see these huge tumuli, which was a practice dating all the way back to the Kushite era and even the Kerma era, and even the pre-dynastic era. Certainly, ancient tumuli building was ancient in the Middle Nile Valley in ancient Kush. And there's even archaeological evidence to suggest that that practice even extended all the way into West Africa, Niger, Mali, Senegal, and so forth. But that's another conversation. And so they left these tumuli, and within them, Kerwin, Emery, who excavated some of these tombs, these mounds back in the 30s, they found Christian paraphernalia, but they also found traditional iconography, like crowns with Amun plumes and Amun iconography. They also found amulets dedicated to the goddess Isis, side by side with Christian liturgical spoons, as well as relics, which held the remains of monks and so forth. So we had all of this together in these tombs, both ancient Kushite and as well as Nubian cultural artifacts, religious artifacts, ancient Egyptian artifacts, alongside an emerging Christianity. So you see that in terms of the cultural and linguistic evidence, this multilingual society where we see evidence of Greek, we see evidence of Coptic, we see evidence of Meroitic, we see evidence of Nubian, we see Egyptian gods being appealed to, ancient Kushite religious spiritual practices being appealed to, Christian traditions being appealed to, all in the same assemblage. It's beautiful. And then certainly the ancient architecture of the tumuli and the mound building and so forth. And so one of the great church historians once said, W.H.C. Friend, he says that the post-Meroitic period, or the early Christian period in Nubia, was a period that was looking forward and backward simultaneously. And we see that. Right? This period where they were looking forward, emerging into a new cultural identity, while at the same time referencing and bringing in long ancient traditions in the Middle Nile Valley. So I enjoy studying this period. There's much to learn from it in terms of cultural continuity, cultural complexity, and multiple religious identities, as well as multilingualism, right? And it helps us understand how these ancient societies functioned and lived. And it also, I believe, gives a lesson even for today with how we can coexist in the midst of multiple cultural and religious and linguistic practices and identities. So thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Dr. Salim Faraji, for all the explaining this multiple cultural complexities and multiple religious identities in ancient Nubia. When we don't have questions about this, of course, you're looking just forward to see your perspective and how do you look at Nubia from your own approach and perspective in Nubia. Thank you very much, Professor Salim, and looking forward for another interview about the ancient Nubian religions.
Yes,
I know you're specialized in that too.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to stop right now. Okay.